What if sea level rose 1 meter, 10 meters, then 100 meters? At plus 1 meter, storms don't need to be historic to be dangerous. High tide starts higher, so ordinary wind and rain push water into basements, tunnels, and subway stairs. The first visible change is nuisance flooding on sunny days. A coastal road floods at king tide, traffic detours, and deliveries arrive late because the water is no longer an exception. Saltwater starts creeping into groundwater and river deltas. A water treatment plant works harder, crops lose yield, and the same city now pays more for clean drinking water. Ports feel it early, because docks and container yards sit at sea level by design. A storm surge crosses the seawall, cranes stop, and supply chains stall on a windy afternoon. Insurance reacts before governments do. Flood maps update, premiums jump, and mortgages become harder because lenders don't like assets that can't be priced confidently. Plus 1 meter isn't a movie flood, it's a budget flood. The crisis is paperwork, permits, premiums, repairs, until it becomes a migration decision. Coastal cities build seawalls, pump stations, and raised roads. Each project protects one district, but shifts water to another, creating political fights that show up in council chambers and protest signs. Drainage systems fail because they were designed to drain into the sea. When the ocean is higher, storm drains backflow, and a simple cloudburst turns an underpass into a brown water basin. Airports near coasts become fragile nodes. A runway floods, flights cancel, tourism drops, and local businesses feel it even if their storefronts are dry. Rail lines and highways that hug the shoreline start to relocate. Construction zones appear on maps, commute times rise, and the cost of being coastal becomes a daily tax. Small islands and low-lying neighborhoods face a harder reality than seawalls. You can't build a barrier around every home, so buyouts, relocations, and abandoned blocks begin. Food systems feel it through deltas and estuaries. Salty soils reduce rice and vegetable yields, and the price shocks show up in supermarket aisles far from the coast. Plus 1 meter changes what's normal, not what's possible. Once adaptation costs exceed local wealth, the story stops being engineering and becomes social sorting. Before moving on to 10 meters, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment if you want more videos like this. Now scale the map to plus 10 meters, and coastlines redraw like a new continent. Entire low-lying regions disappear under a smooth blue layer, and the old shoreline becomes a memory. At plus 10 meters, many coastal megacities lose their historical centers. You can move a seawall, but you can't move a city's subway network, power substations, and sewage tunnels cheaply. Ports, refineries, and shipyards are hit simultaneously, not one at a time. When multiple hubs fail, container routes rewire, and shortages show up as delayed parts, not empty shelves. River mouths push inland, and floodplains become permanent wetlands. Bridges become useless where the roadbed disappears, and supply trucks need new corridors built at higher elevation. Real estate becomes a liquidation event. When buyers vanish, prices collapse, tax revenue falls, and city services degrade precisely when they're most needed. Governments face a triage problem visible in budget spreadsheets. Do you protect a capital city, a port, or a whole coastline, when each seawall costs billions and fails without constant maintenance? Plus 10 meters turns adaptation into relocation. The main currency becomes not money, but land, safe, elevated, connected land that can host millions. Migration becomes structural, not episodic. Refugee camps aren't tents after a storm. They become new towns, and temporary housing turns into permanent urban sprawl. Borders harden when people move in large numbers. Checkpoints expand, asylum systems overload, and political parties rise on promises to hold the line against geography. Public health shifts because water and sanitation systems don't move easily. Standing water spreads mosquito habitats, clinics overflow, and clean water queues become a daily risk point. Energy infrastructure is remapped in painful stages. Coastal power plants and substations flood, transmission lines reroute, and rolling blackouts appear as grids try to serve relocated populations. Industry relocates, but not cleanly. Factories need transport links, labor, and water, so some regions boom while others collapse into unemployment and empty industrial parks. National identity changes when iconic places vanish. A historic harbor is underwater, a skyline becomes an offshore silhouette, and memory turns into politics through museums and grief. When cities move, economies don't just shift, they fracture. The winners aren't the most virtuous, they're the regions with high ground and existing infrastructure. Agriculture reorganizes around new coastlines and rainfall patterns. Some inland areas gain longer growing seasons, while others lose soil quality to salinization and flooding. Global trade becomes slower because new ports must be built inland. Rail yards, warehouses, and customs zones appear on fresh maps, and the cost of moving goods rises permanently. Financial markets try to price a moving coastline. Bonds for coastal municipalities get downgraded, insurers retreat, and governments become the insurer of last resort by necessity. Cultural power shifts away from coastal capitals. Universities, media hubs, and headquarters relocate, and the center of a country moves inland on both maps and social networks. Security doctrine changes with the shoreline. Naval bases flood, coastal radar moves, and new choke points emerge where elevated corridors become strategic supply routes. Now the question becomes, how far can society stretch without snapping? When relocation becomes normal, trust depends on fairness, and fairness depends on governance capacity under stress. We've stayed within the realm of hard choices and painful budgets. Now we jump to plus 100 meters, a scenario beyond near-term climate, used as a stress test for civilization. At plus 100 meters, whole countries lose their familiar shape. Coastal plains vanish, mountain ridges become islands, and the world map looks like a different planet in a classroom atlas. This isn't flooding, it's the end of coastal civilization as a default. The old economic logic, ports, trade hubs, seaside megacities, stops being a blueprint and becomes archaeology. Most current airports, ports, and coastal highways are gone. Logistics rebuild around inland seas and new shorelines, where new harbors must be carved and connected from scratch. Global population concentrates on elevated belts visible on relief maps. Those corridors become crowded, expensive, and politically volatile because everyone needs the same scarce high ground. Freshwater becomes the most contested resource. Glacial melt, mountain reservoirs, and river headwaters define power, and control of dams becomes as strategic as control of oil once was. Food production moves to plateaus and temperate interiors. Vertical farms and controlled greenhouses expand, but the energy demand rises, linking food security to power grids tightly. At plus 100 meters, the question isn't, can we protect the coast? It's, can we coordinate a new geography without constant conflict? Nation-states renegotiate borders around new shorelines. Treaties break, new claims appear, and maps become contested documents, like property deeds in a courtroom. Megacities don't die overnight, they hollow out. Abandoned towers rust near new coastlines, while new inland megacities rise with cranes, concrete, and hurried zoning. Disease risks rise in transitional settlements. Crowded camps, poor sanitation, and heat stress create outbreaks, and public health becomes a security priority, not a social service. Economies simplify under stress. Luxury markets shrink, repair trades grow, and black markets thrive where formal systems can't keep up with demand for water, fuel, and permits. Education and culture transform with displacement. Museums become archives of drowned cities, and a generation grows up with maps that show their grandparents' hometowns underwater. Military strategy shifts inland. Navies lose relevance, ground logistics dominate, and conflicts cluster around mountain passes, river valleys, and rail corridors that feed megacities. Big numbers can numb you, so we zoom into a single person. Because a moving coastline isn't a statistic, It's a lease, a school, a hospital, and a family decision. Meet Sarah, a nurse living in a coastal neighborhood with a flood map on her fridge. At +1 meter, her commute crosses a road that closes monthly, and overtime becomes routine because hospitals run short-staffed. Her landlord raises rent to pay new insurance, then repairs, then more repairs. Eventually the building is declared high risk, and the bank refuses to refinance, so maintenance stops and mold spreads. When her family relocates inland, school enrollment becomes a lottery. New districts overflow, class sizes jump, and parents wait in gymnasiums for placement lists taped to walls. Sarah's hospital keeps backup generators and sandbags by the loading dock. Yet each storm disrupts supply deliveries, oxygen cylinders, medications, sterile kits, so patient care becomes a logistics battle. At +10 meters, her coastal city becomes a managed retreat zone. Government buyouts arrive, but payouts lag, and her savings evaporate while she pays rent in a temporary apartment. Her new inland town has cranes everywhere and traffic gridlock daily. Everyone is building at once, and the price of land becomes the price of belonging. At +100 meters, coastal becomes a word from old photos. Sarah tells her children stories with museum exhibits and VR walkthroughs of drowned streets, because the places no longer exist physically. The human story shows the real mechanism. Displacement is not one move. It's repeated moves, each one stripping savings, relationships, and institutional continuity. Now step back and ask what really breaks first. It's not walls or pumps, it's governance capacity, permitting, funding, and managing relocation fairly at scale. If relocation is unequal, resentment becomes fuel. Neighborhoods accuse each other of being protected or sacrificed, and politics turns into a fight over whose losses count. If relocation is organized, societies can bend without snapping. Land use planning, transit corridors, and pre-built housing reduce chaos, and trust becomes the strongest form of infrastructure. The biggest economic shift is where value lives. In a stable world, location is everything. In a moving world, adaptability becomes everything: portable skills, modular buildings, and resilient supply networks. The biggest psychological shift is what home means. When coastlines move, permanence dies, and communities either rebuild identity locally or fracture into transient, disconnected networks. So the final question isn't only, how high does the sea rise? It's whether societies build systems that can relocate people with dignity, or whether geography turns into a permanent class divide.